Dr. David Perlmutter, and welcome to the Empowering Neurologist. Thyroid problems are a big issue. Here's a terrific book, and we're going to talk about it today, The Thyroid Connection by Dr. Amy Myers. I've known Dr. Myers for many, many years. She is one of our leaders in what is called functional medicine. She is a New York Times best-selling author. Her last book was The Autoimmune Solution. The new book also deals a lot with autoimmunity because, as you're going to learn, thyroid issues are quite commonly autoimmune in nature. But getting back to Dr. Myers, she received her doctorate in medicine from LSU, Health Sciences, and then spent 5 years doing emergency room medicine. Then she gained her training at the Institute for Functional Medicine. Dr. Myers has literally helped thousands of individuals overcome puzzling and chronic illnesses through her mostly dietary-based program, which she calls the Myers Way. She's created multiple online resources, tools that are available for you to learn about her revolutionary approach to health. Her blog and her website are actually very, very popular, and again, filled with just terrific information, mainly focused on chronic diseases and much of which dealing with autoimmune conditions. So we're going to learn from her today about thyroid issues, why they're so darn prevalent in our modern cosmopolitan society, and what we can do to learn more about that. Well, hello, Dr. Myers, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege.
As I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be talking about your new book. We're going to be talking about the thyroid. And why don't we just start at the beginning and tell our viewers, explain what does the thyroid do? Why is it so darn important?
Sure. So I think of the thyroid really as the engine of our car in a certain kind of way. It's our metabolism. So I myself, as I write about in the book, had Graves' disease where my thyroid was overactive. What people are more familiar with typically is an underactive thyroid, or maybe they've even heard the word Hashimoto's. So when you have an overactive thyroid, everything speeds up. So you think about, I was having weight loss. My heart rate was elevated. I was warm. I was losing a lot of weight. I had tremors. And when people have a low thyroid, everything kind of slows down. So people might have slow mentation or brain fog, depression. They gain weight. They have dry skin. They might, have constipation, be cold. There's a lot of symptoms that people typically think about. So the thyroid is really regulating every cell in our body. There are receptors on every cell in our body for our thyroid, and it's telling us to speed up or to slow down.
So really, this is, as it's been called, the master gland. It's controlling the metabolism of, as you say, every cell has thyroid hormone receptors on it. And it seems to me that we're hearing an awful lot about thyroid problems these days. How prevalent is thyroid disorder in American society?
Well, in America, we believe there are about 27 million people who have it. And, that's an estimation. I think is probably far greater than that. And of those 27 million, only 60% don't even realize they have it. So I think it's an epidemic right now that is really, and we can, I'm sure, get into that, of how conventional medicine really doesn't do a great job of picking this up and detecting it. And we can go into all of those reasons. But I think because of that, as well as a lot of environmental factors that are going on, we're really in an epidemic state with the thyroid. I bet there's probably not a single listener out there that doesn't know someone with thyroid dysfunction.
Well, you touched upon something that I wanted to just jump right into, and that is about the people who may not know that the thyroid problem that they may not know about may be the cause of some of their issues. And you talk about at the beginning of your book about how so many people can go to the doctor and actually end up with a thyroid blood test, thyroid panel, that is actually within the normal range, and yet you're talking about how they could still have some significant thyroid issues. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's really a large portion of who the book is for. All these people who, have identified with any of those symptoms I was just talking about, whether it's the hyperthyroid symptoms or the hypo, which again is far more common. And yet they've gone to the doctor. They've said, oh, we checked your thyroid. Everything's normal. So let me tell you two ways in which that I know, I know. So let me tell you two ways that is very common that that can be absolutely wrong. The first is that conventional doctors, and you and I were both trained in conventional medicine, and then we've gone into functional medicine. So I really understand this from a conventional medicine perspective, and then also from a patient perspective and a functional medicine perspective. But they're typically only checking a TSH, and that's called a thyroid stimulating hormone. And actually what that's doing is really telling us about what the pituitary is doing. It's a signal to the thyroid. It works at this feedback loop, negative feedback loop, telling the thyroid to produce more hormone. So it's not even actually really checking what the thyroid itself is doing. So, and it's very limited. So what I typically check, and I'm sure you did in your practice as well, is a much larger panel that does include a TSH, but it also includes a T4, a free T4, a free T3, a reverse T3, and then I check antibodies on everybody to pick up if their thyroid is actually being attacked by their immune system, like mine was, called Graves when it's hyper, or Hashimoto's when it's hypo. And let me tell you, out of all of those, the most important one to really look at least I believe in my world, is a free T3. And the reason is that that is the hormone with all of our hormones in general, whether it's our sex hormones or our thyroid hormones, it's our free hormones that matter. When you're looking at a total, they're bound to other proteins and we can't use them. So when it's a free hormone, that's actually what enables to go into that receptor and into the cell. And it's that free T3 that keeps us warm, gives us energy, keeps us from having brain fog, and really is regulating everything else in our body. And so conventional medicine frequently is not even checking a free T3.
Well, we
So
see
that,
the same thing, for example, in testosterone, that
oh yes,
generally doctors look at a total testosterone, and what you mentioned is when there's a free hormone analysis, you're looking at the hormone that is unbound. It is not bound by its carrier protein and therefore is available to do its job. And again, for so many men who've had a so-called normal testosterone, but actually based upon their hormone binding globulin, they may not have available free hormone to do the job. What about basal body temperature?
oh, that as well. I certainly have people, so, checking all the thyroid that I mentioned, we'll get into the reference ranges, and then basal body temperature is a great way for people to check because your temperature can't lie. I mean, unless literally you're like the Dalai Lama or somebody who can, through mind body cause your temperature to rise or lower, which I do believe there are people to do that. The average person out there can't. You might get anxious when you go to the doctor, so your heart rate might be elevated. Of course, the heart rate is a good way to tell if you're hypo or hyper, but we can, when we're relaxed, our heart rate slows down. And when we get anxious, which a lot of people are doing at the doctor, their heart rate goes up. So that's a vital sign that may not be super accurate when you're going to your doctor. But if they check your temperature at the doctor and it's less than 98.5, it's in the 97s, or you're getting up in the morning, and maybe more women are familiar with this because they can also use this to track their fertility, but it's taking a measurement of your temperature first thing in the morning before rising, and typically at the same time every day. If that temperature is consistently low, and I have patients tell me, oh, it's 96, it's in the low 97s, and it's consistently like that, that can definitely be an indicator of thyroid dysfunction. Or
So
certainly
even
low
well
thyroid.
beyond getting the enhanced panel that you talk about, just a simple measurement of basal body temperature in the morning before you get out of bed is really giving you a lot of good information.
It is. And then I'd love to talk about the other reason why conventional medicine often misses this diagnosis of thyroid dysfunction. And that has to do with, even if they do test the right labs, which again, most of them are not, but even if they do, they're looking at a reference range, particularly with the TSH, that is way too broad. When we were coming up with this reference range for TSH, they actually realized after the fact that they had all these people with thyroid dysfunction. And so even the Academy of Endocrinology back in 2002 was saying that we needed to change this reference range and we needed to narrow the reference range. And that went out in all kinds of statements, and some doctors adhered to that and some labs changed, but many did not. I mean, many people did not even notice that that went out. And so physicians are using a reference range that really is not adequate, and it's way too broad.
So what we're talking about is this test called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And just for a point of clarification, the higher that number is, it means the harder the pituitary gland is working to send a signal to the thyroid then to wake up and do its job. So you really want to make sure that your TSH is lower than even what Dr. Myers is talking about, what Amy we were talking about, than the so-called normal range. We really want to look at not normal range, but what is optimal, and it's going to be a little bit lower than maybe your doctor is comfortable. Having said that, I was very taken by the very end of your book, Appendix A, where you actually wrote a letter from you for your readers to take to their doctors, explaining in a kind and loving way why it is they may not be totally aware of how to look at the thyroid gland, and you even invite them to go to your website. I was very, very taken by that. That was pretty bold.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, this book, as opposed to my first book, The Autoimmune Solution, was very much like conventional medicine is getting autoimmunity wrong. Just do this program instead. This book is very much a work with your doctor. I mean, as anybody with thyroid can tell you, that you can change your diet and do all these lifestyle factors, but if you need supplemental thyroid hormone and you're not on the right dose or the right type, it makes a huge difference. And
Well,
likewise,
here's your here's your first book, which I think is
thank you.
fantastic. So tell us why there is such a very natural segue from the autoimmune solution now to a book about the thyroid. What's this immune connection, and why are so many people having the issue?
Yeah, well, so I'll first say from a personal level, I had autoimmune thyroid. So it kind of made sense that I write this general autoimmune book to help anybody with autoimmunity. And just seeing the epidemic that's going on, the people coming in mismanaged and misdiagnosed in my own clinic, and then my own personal story with thyroid, I felt very compelled to just dive even deeper into the thyroid. But the segue is that the vast majority of thyroid dysfunction is autoimmune in nature. And for anybody that isn't familiar with autoimmunity, I mean, the basic principle is that, we have our immune system that is working day in and day out to fight off different invaders such as bacteria and viruses, and we don't even know it's there and doing its job, but it can get confused. And if you'd like, I can go into the reasons why it can get confused, but it can get confused from being exposed to different proteins like gluten, to different viruses like Epstein-Barr or herpes, and it can actually, these proteins of these molecules of the viruses in the food can look very similar to our own tissue, often our own thyroid tissue, and our immune system gets confused. It's called molecular mimicry, and actually goes in and attacks the thyroid inadvertently. And so, like I said, the vast majority of thyroid dysfunction is autoimmune in nature. And so it just was a great segue in terms of my own personal story, what I'm seeing in my own clinic, and then, the epidemic, and really how I do believe that conventional medicine is really underdiagnosing this epidemic.
I so agree with you, especially after reading your book. That said, you spend a lot of time talking about food. And, this is certainly not a new notion that food is one of our most important choices as it relates to health and disease resistance. What is the food-thyroid connection?
Yeah, so the main food that I think about is about gluten. I mean,
I've heard of this gluten of which you speak.
Yes, right. Of course, you know all about it. So gluten, as everybody has read in your books as well, kind of how we've hybridized that, we have the Roundup on it, is creating a leaky gut. There are many things, including medications and back to how we're born through C-sections. I mean, you talk about all of this in all of your books as well, about this whole epidemic of leaky gut. But when we're talking about food in general, not only is gluten creating a leaky gut for many people, when the gut is leaky and the protein is able to get through into the bloodstream, that is one that we know very specific research on, that it has this molecular structure that is very similar to the thyroid. So whether you have autoimmune thyroid or just thyroid dysfunction, whether it's thyroid cancer, thyroid cysts, thyroid nodules, anybody with any type of thyroid dysfunction, I really advise them to get off of gluten because of this molecular mimicry that the body or the immune system perceives when it goes to attack the gluten that should not be in our bloodstream because of leaky gut, and its molecules look very similar to the thyroid tissue. It inadvertently attacks the thyroid. I mean, certainly we could go into a whole host of other foods, but that's the biggest one that comes to mind, or the one that we have the most research about.
You also spend a good deal of time talking about vitamin D. And, I think most people would think that vitamin D is involved in keeping our bones healthy. it's something that in some miraculous way comes from sunshine. But I think obviously the story is certainly through the lens of the thyroid and immunity is much more intense. Maybe you can walk us through that.
Yeah, so as we know that that vitamin D is so important, it's really more of a hormone and an immune modulator, meaning that it affects the immune system. And since most thyroid is autoimmune in nature, it's very important for the immune system to have vitamin D in order to regulate itself properly. We also need some vitamin D to help get that free T3 into the cell. And nutritional deficiencies are probably one of the number one causes that I see for thyroid dysfunction. One of the places that I'm seeing not only is the autoimmune component, but I am seeing the conversion from T4 to T3. Would you like me to kind of go over very briefly
Absolutely.
how the thyroid works? Okay.
Sure.
So our thyroid is producing T4 mostly, and T4 is the storage form of the thyroid hormone. So meaning it's not very active, and a teeny tiny part of that gets converted into T3. And then T3 can do one of two things. It can either become your gas, which is free T3 that we talked about, or it can kind of become the brake, which is reverse T3. And you want a kind of a nice ratio between this free T3 and a reverse T3. I like to use 10 to 1. But you certainly want more gas than you do brake. When there's a lot more brake, we think of things like high stress, starvation, heavy metals, or some of the things that we think about. So this free T3, we've already discussed how important it is getting into every cell and regulating our metabolism. So we need a lot of nutrients in order to make all of these conversions, from making the thyroid hormone in the first place and the signaling to the TSH. We're needing iodine and tyrosine. We need B vitamins to make this conversion: selenium, iodine, vitamin A, vitamin D. So we're seeing so many people, or I'm seeing so many people that are deficient in these because we're eating a nutrient poor diet. We have leaky guts. We have infections like SIBO, small bowel bacterial overgrowth. We have candida overgrowth. So people aren't absorbing their nutrients. I see all kinds of people on reading your book and my book, and they're on paleo diets, and then nobody's actually fixed their gut yet. So they're eating this incredible diet, and then we do nutritional testing on them, and you're thinking, this doesn't match up at all. And then we do a stool test and find all these infections, and they're just not absorbing, or they have low stomach acid. So they're not breaking down these incredible proteins that they're eating into their amino acids. And so there's so many different ways, either just not getting them naturally from our food, getting them but not digesting and absorbing them. And I see that is one of the biggest problems. And of course, I talk about this in the book, and supplements they can take, and of course, eating a diet rich in all of these nutrients that I've just mentioned to help that, for many people, can just reset their thyroid or get their thyroid to work appropriately.
Well, it's a wonderful book, and I know it is already helping a lot of people. Very excited for you, and I want to just express gratitude that you made lemonade out of the lemons and experienced something in your own life, and rather than just deal with it, recognize that this is a very, very big problem globally. And you set out to educate so many people, to empower them with really very wonderful, actionable material. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for being on the program today.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think in life, when you have something terrible happen to you, you can either crawl up in a ball and be sorry for yourself, or you can say, I'm going to go out and hope that this doesn't happen to anybody else. And that's kind of what I've decided to do. So I really appreciate you for all that you do and for helping me spread my message and reach more people. So thank you so much.
Great. We will talk soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, that was a very intriguing interview. Dr. Myers is doing some amazing work and really opening our eyes to another way of looking at not just the thyroid, but chronic disease in general, and in specific, looking at autoimmune conditions. Again, here's her book, The Thyroid Connection by Dr. Amy Myers, a wonderful read. Understand that thyroid problems may very well explain a lot of issues that people have for which they're not finding solutions. So it was very interesting, and I'm very grateful to have had her on the program today. Thank you all for joining us today. I will see you soon. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter.